All right, so in this video, we're going to primarily focus on the topic of inheritance in CSS. So this second to the last bullet point. And so we'll talk about some different strategies that we can use or employ while we're constructing our CSS style sheet. After we talk about CSS inheritance or inheritance in CSS, we'll go back to coding this file path worksheet and add in CSS. And then we're going to also add a font to this particular PDF or to our website. So let's go ahead and skip to the slides here that focus on implementing inheritance. All right, so if you look at this graphic here to the right where my mouse is hovering, you'll see that we're building out this, well, if you remember, we're going to build out this tree structure where the HTML tag is going to be the root tag, and then the two immediate children is going to be head and body. The head communicates the metadata, and then the body is where everything gets rendered in the browser. And so there's this parent-child relationship that you see. For instance, H1, UL, and P are the immediate children of body, and then LI is the immediate child of UL, which is the ordered list or unordered list. And so whatever presentation or CSS declarations you give to the body, guess who inherits those CSS style? It's going to be H1, UL, P, and even I would say in this case, the grandchildren, the LI and the EM. And so if we say color, and then we give the body color blue, everyone that's stemming from body will receive the color blue. And so here in bolded text here, it says it's best to put general default styles in the parent and then override in the child elements when necessary. So if the majority of your document and the text in your document is going to be, let's say, orange, right? Just move that to the parent, and then that way all the children receive the color orange. And then if you do need to override the color orange for a child, for instance, if the P tag had a different color text, then you will put you would just override at the P level, but then everyone receive the orange text if you put it inside the body. Like I said, we'll do an example of this if that didn't make a lot of sense. But then this next slide here will kind of give you the CSS coding for that. So here, and so instead of actually doing this here where you say H1, the P, the UL, the EM, and the LI receives color red, if they're all children of the body, just go up a level to the parent, who's the parent of all of these tags in its body, and give it the color red. And so you can essentially reduce 5 CSS style rules down to 1 by playing to inheritance. And like I said, it reduces your code, but also the page speed, upload time would also would increase because it doesn't have to basically process as many different style rules when the engine within the browser has to read that CSS spreadsheet. So here, CSS style inheritance promotes good coding practice, but also it allows you to faster update changes that need to be made to your code. And so if I do need to make a change and change all the text to my HTML document, if all the text is red, I would just go to the body and say color blue, right? So let's go ahead and do an example of this. I want to do an example of this using a font. So I'm going to bring in a font from our website, for our website. That's going to be this font here, which is Calibril, and we'll use inheritance so that all of the text within our document will receive the same font. All right, so let's go ahead and jump back to our document here that we've been working on within these videos. And so here's what we currently have so far is that we've coded out all the HTML for that PDF document. We gave structure by giving it the most appropriate HTML tag to wrap the content within. There's a few more things I want to do here. One, I want to add a tag called main to represent the main section of my website. And so typically between the header and the footer, that's going to be the content that's going to change from page to page. And then the things that are within the header and the footer are things that are going to remain constant from page to page. Years ago, if you were learning HTML and CSS, you would do everything within a div tag, right? But since the release of HTML5, they released a number of different tags that really try to give, kind of give segments of your, or kind of describe segments of your web page. So you have the header, you have this main section. Within the main section, you may have article or section, the section tag. So you want to do your best to try to basically section off your website according to the content or what that section will represent. In this case here, between lines 47 and 59, this is going to represent the main section of my website. The other thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to add some input tags. And these input tags is going to allow me to create a line where the end user can input some information. And we'll talk more about input tags, and essentially they're used when you're building out forms. And based on how you specify the type attribute is how it's going to show up. So you'll see that there's a list. So if you do a button, you can specify a button or a date. You'll have a calendar view. If you do a file, it'll be a file upload button. It'll render as in a browser. But in this case here, we want text, and we're going to do one more attribute called size, and then we'll just say 35. And then what I'm going to do is just copy this and paste this for each list item. All right, so each one of these now have the input element for the list item. And then if we save this, and I'm also going to reduce this logo here with a width attribute. And just put it as 200 for now. And we'll talk more about the width attribute and how those can be used to shorten or reduce the size of an image. So I'm going to save that, and that's going to render what we have in the browser. So we'll open this in Chrome, and you'll see this is kind of what we have thus far. We already gave some presentation to the H1 and the H2 within the head of our document. We'll continue to flesh out the presentation and add CSS to this document. But like I said, right now, what I want to do is add in a font and talk about inheritance and how we can give this whole entire everything that's rendered within the body of our document, we can give it the same font. So let's jump back to our HTML document here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to need to add some files. So right now, if you don't have access to these files, let me just show you a place where you can get those files from. And so here's a URL that you can navigate to access the files. So I'll just copy this here. And I'll just go to the browser. It's a tiny URL, so you can pause this video and then just copy this or just type it in. And it'll take you to my GitHub account where you basically pull the file structure and the IT worksheets file from. So go ahead and pull down the WOOF and the WOOF2. And those are the two that you will need for this video. So once you've downloaded those, so if you click on this, you can just go ahead and click download, and it'll download to your local machine. And then just add that file to your project structure or your project folder. So once you have that, what we're going to do is I'm going to give you one more snippet of code here. So here's a snippet of code I would like for you to copy or type in. So if you had to pause this video, go ahead and type this in. But where would you type this in? I'm going to right click, copy, and I'm going to paste this into my internal CSS, and I'm going to paste it in as one of the first things. So I'll paste this in, and we'll talk more about this add font face style rule, or this add font face rule. This allows me to bring in an external font, right? So there's something called web browser safe fonts, or web safe browser fonts. But if you want to bring in an external font, you can do that. But you have to use this add font face, and this would be the syntax you would have to use. I want to give this the name of Calibril. That's going to be the font family name that I'll use. And what I need to do here is give the relative file path to these resources from my index.html file. So in this case here, I'll just change this to font / Calabrill, and then I'll do the same thing here, font / Calabrill. And then here's where I'm going to play to inheritance. So I could take this font family here, I'll copy that, and I could put it in as the H1, and I could put it in as the H2, right? But that's not needed because I want my whole entire body to receive or have access to this font or display in this Calabrill font. And so instead of actually putting it into the individual children, right, I'm going to make it the default. And one of the ways to make this font the default is to put it within the body of your style rule, your body style rule. So I'll say font family Calabrill, and I'll just do a fallback font here of Arial Helvetica sans serif. And so what this means here is that if this one fails for any reason, this one is going to trigger next. If this Arial fails, Helvetica is going to trigger. If Helvetica fails for any reason in the browser, sans serif is going to trigger. And so these are called fallback fonts. But this here is going to be the first font that renders. And so just to test this out, let's go and save this, Control S, and that's going to render our document in the browser. And so now you'll see that we have that Calabrill font, and we may need to change a few things here in terms of adjusting the font size, but nonetheless, our font is properly triggering. So if you look at our previous document, where it was this Times New Roman, right? This is now showing with the Calabrill font, and that's what we want. Last but not least here, now we've been talking about inheritance, right? But there is this idea of which CSS takes precedence. And so let me say a few words about that before I end this video. So here, and this kind of throws a lot of people off, but inline CSS is always going to take precedence over internal, right? So here's our internal with using the style tags. And then depending on how you place the internal and the external is going to determine which CSS is going to take precedence. Right now, because we have the internal CSS underneath the external file, this internal CSS is going to take precedence over anything that I have in a style.css file. But if I were to move this, copy it, and I were to paste it below my internal CSS, guess what's going to take precedence? And let's say, for instance, we had we had an H1 in our internal, and we had an H1 in our external. You could potentially override yourself if you really wanted this to happen and you had an H1 inside of your external file. The one that's going to take precedence is going to be with the H1 inside of your external file. And so it's just one of the things you want to be cautious about, you want to be aware of, is that make sure that however you place your external file within your document, you want to make sure that whatever code you want to trigger or want to give presentation to is placed correctly within the head of your document. Typically, I usually have my external file come first and then have my internal CSS because I want to typically override things within my external CSS using my internal CSS. So anything I put in my internal will override or take precedence over the code that's here. So hopefully that makes sense. If not, I'll come back to this multiple times and kind of you'll see my process for adding CSS to a document. But like I said, there is this level. Yes, there's inheritance, but also there's this notion of which code takes precedence over other CSS code. All right. So in the next video, we're going to get back into styling our document, and then we're going to talk about some more additional selectors that we can use to target areas within our HTML document, or target HTML elements within our document.